My name is Mira Rowan. The year my life split neatly into before and after was the year I turned 13. If you wanted me to point to the precise second the people who were supposed to be my world decided I was optional, it wasn't some slow cinematic fade, it was a refrigerator note, stay at Sam's for a week. Love, Mom? No signature, no explanation. Just Mom's looping handwriting that read like a dismissal. They left that morning, the house humming with the kind of cheer that makes departure look like celebration. My eldest sister, Jana, posted a photo of herself with a coral suitcase and a caption about family adventures. Little Lila followed with glossy palm tree stickers on every story. I sat on the porch with my backpack on my knees, convinced it was a mistake. Later someone would laugh, someone would knock, someone would say, just kidding. The sun set and the streetlights blinked awake, and no one came. For the first day I convinced myself of an error. By the fourth day a different thought arrived, one I didn't want to own. They had left me on purpose. Being the middle child had always meant being the bridge between the spotlight and the finale. Jana collected awards. Lila had recitals and glittery braces. I had responsibility, adult shorthand for invisible. But abandonment introduced a silence I hadn't known how to survive. On the sixth day I walked from the library clutching a stack of borrowed books like armor, heat bending the air around me. A glossy black sedan eased to the curb and the window rolled down like something out of someone else's life. Myra? The voice held surprise and something kinder. Arthur Whitman, the wealthy uncle who had stopped joining family gatherings before I could do double digits, peered out. Mom had always called him prideful. Now I understood that was her label for someone who kept his life sharply delineated. He looked at my backpack, at my sweaty hair, at the tight smile I used like a mask. Why are you out here by yourself? Where are your parents? He asked. Florida, I said, and the word came out absurd like I'd reported they'd been launched to another planet. Get in, he said. You're not walking anywhere tonight. Every safety lecture about strangers echoed in my head. But hunger has its own loud logic. The car smelled of leather and something clean and absolute, not perfume, not citrus, but the smell of money that hasn't softened. He drove to a faded diner with red booths and pies under glass domes. When the burger and shake landed in front of me, I stared as though they might dissipate if I blinked. He let me eat. He asked about school and friends and what I liked. When I said history, more the forgotten bits than the famous dates, he smiled like he'd found a small fortune. Back at my street, he didn't sit just to drop me off. He told me to pack a bag. Pack, Myra, he said. The world opened like a door with hidden hinges. His home was another atmosphere. Soft sheets, a guest bed that looked too luxurious to touch. I perched on its edge like someone performing a ritual. Don't wrinkle the sheets, I whispered. They can be washed, he said, half smile warm with plain kindness. Things are meant to be used, not feared. Morning brought orange juice poured into a glass, real glass, not the sun-warmed plastic cups we had at home. When the school called to ask who would attend a meeting, he answered without hesitation, I will. His calm, 2 words that carried weight eased something that had been taught inside me. He purchased me clothes and handed me lunch money. I hid the tags because spending felt like trespassing. 12 days after he rescued me from the porch, I was caught in the kitchen at midnight, crouched over a cereal box, rehearsing how much was too much. Are you practicing to be nocturnal? He asked from the doorway. I don't want to take too much, I said. He opened the fridge, scooped pasta into a bowl, warmed it, and handed it to me. If it's in this house, it belongs to everyone who lives here, he said. That includes you. I swallowed hard and tried not to cry into the pasta. Tears felt like a debt I didn't want to owe. I kept waiting for the sound of the front door, for my parents to march in with explanations. But days slipped into weeks. Jana posted flawless beach photos and happy captions about family time. Lila covered her cheeks in shells and glitter. My name did not appear under any of it. Arthur accompanied me to the school conference where the counselor described me as quiet with potential. He didn't argue. He took notes and later bought me a desk so I could study somewhere other than the floor. He booked doctor appointments I'd never had, scheduled a dentist, made sure I had routine care I hadn't known the importance of. He called it maintenance as if people were not projects but worth keeping in good order. At 13, I still tested boundaries. Once I came home late after being with a friend. I expected an explosion. He handed me a turkey sandwich and said, "Glad you're alive. Next time text. Otherwise, I'll assume you're in a ditch and bring a flashlight." The evenness in his voice felt more disarming than wrath. Sometimes he'd bring me to his office and tell me to watch how people spoke and carried themselves. "Half of success is tone and handshake," he'd murmur, clasping a client's hand. "The rest is showing up when everyone else invents excuses." That holiday season I expected a perfunctory present and a polite smile. Instead he gave me a leather-bound journal with my initials stamped in gold. "Write down what you notice," he told me, "even the small things." I traced the cover like one might inspect an unfamiliar animal, vulnerable and fascinated. Later that night my phone buzzed with a photo, my family in matching pajamas beside a flawless tree. No caption saying, "We miss you." I flipped the journal open and wrote, "Things in this house are meant to be shared, not feared." Then I wrote, "If something is in this house, it belongs to everyone who lives in it." Finally, I wrote, "I am in this house." The words felt borrowed. But when I closed the cover, something sturdy, a faint warm presence I couldn't name. Not safety. Not yet. A draft of it. Years later, those diner booths and that small book would become the hinge points I returned to. For now, I was 13, wrapped in sheets that smelled of bleach instead of stale living, learning a truth that seemed impossible. I was not disposable. I'd been misplaced, but someone had come and slid me back where I belonged. By 14, my uncle had deduced two things. My posture was terrible, and beneath it sat promise. "Stand tall, Myra, you're not punctuation." He jabbed with a finger to my shoulder. He taught me how confidence persuades people half the time, and how, if you look like you believe in yourself, others will follow. I started to straighten involuntarily, then intentionally. Teachers noticed. I raised my hand, joined debate club after he bribed me with pizza, and eventually won my first competition with a shaky voice arguing that cats make better pets. He grinned in the back like someone who had placed a bet and won. At home, he wasn't a sermonizer. He practiced lessons in small acts. When I asked for a phone, he asked how much I'd saved. "None," I admitted. "You'll appreciate it more if you earn half," he said. So I bagged groceries for the summer, marched into the bank with my first paycheck, and he taught me the rule: save half, spend half. He didn't take my money. He led me into habit. Holiday dinners with him were quieter but real. He didn't buy showy gifts. He bought things with care: a used but treasured book, a fountain pen, a scarf he said matched my debate face. He gave me a keychain engraved with his initials and a small phrase, "Work in progress." For both of us. In high school, he let me into his world a little more. Summers I sat in his office and watched adults who wore gravity like couture. "They put on pants one leg at a time," he whispered to me with a chuckle. "Some of them trip, relax." He taught me to listen before speaking, to read intention behind words. He said some people bluff and some apologize for existing. Learn to do neither. Those lessons lodged like bones within me. By 17, the gap between where I came from and where I stood was sharp enough to sting. Jenna filled her social feeds with college acceptances and achievements she shared with everyone but me. Leela posed beside a new car with a caption thanking our parents. I watched and sipped tea Arthur brewed, and he said quietly, "How long will you wait for them to remember you?" I stopped waiting that night. I began the slow work of remembering myself. We sat over spreadsheets for college applications, turning slivers of hope into plans. He didn't hand me tuition like charity. He taught me to find scholarships and fight for funds. He made me work for the pieces of my future so I would value them when they arrived. I wrote hundreds of essays for improbable scholarships for left-handed students. I learned to write with my other hand. For descendants of beekeepers, I wrote about balance between humans and bees, even though my main encounter with a bee was running away from one in 3rd grade. When Western Summit University accepted me, he inspected the letter like a lawyer closing a deal and told me, "Now go prove them right." Move-in day was chaos of joys and departures, and our parents were not part of that picture. He carried boxes up 3 flights of stairs in August heat, refusing to let me take the heavy ones. "Consider this my annual workout," he joked. When the dorm was arranged, he handed me a small note. "If you doubt you belong, check your reflection. You got here without them." I taped it inside my planner and kept it there through 4 years of ramen and determination. Sundays he called, sometimes teasing, sometimes steadying. Struggle keeps you sharp, he'd say. At university, I met Noah Reed in a community garden, someone who knew how to bend his attention toward life and keep it there without theatrics. He didn't try to be my rescuer. He respected me. When finals forced me into late-night certainty checks, he asked why I double-checked everything. Because for a long time I was the mistake no one fixed, I said. He took my hand and said, "Then let's make sure no one overlooks you again." That was the first time I realized someone could see me inside the places I had learned to hide. A complication arrived in the form of an ex, Sabrina. Pretty and practiced in the art of turning personal history into performance. She reappeared asking for nothing more than advice, but old reflexes in me flipped into reaction. Fear of being replaced. I remembered Arthur's lesson. Do neither, don't bluff, don't apologize. So I didn't accuse Noah, I didn't beg. I said, next time. Let her find someone else's generosity. He nodded in the simple clarity. In his quiet acceptance told me more than protest ever. COULD, I earned a degree in civil engineering, the craft of making things that last, and Arthur sat in the front row at graduation clapping loud enough to make the dean glance up. Afterwards he handed me a silver pen. Use this to sign your contracts, he said. You'll be proud. He liked to say build first, brag later. After college I joined a modest engineering firm. It wasn't glamorous, but it was solid. Noah found work nearby, and for the first time the road ahead felt mine. Arthur and I kept a Friday dinner rhythm. He would lift his glass, grin conspiratorially and say, "Look at you, Miss Rowan." He'd tease about ladder climbing and I would joke about falling. Over the years I watched small changes. He canceled dinners claiming brutal work. He stopped finishing stories. Once I found him asleep in his armchair with an infomercial murmuring to an empty house. Prescription bottles multiplied on counters. He began repeating the same anecdote twice in the space of an evening. We fell into a pact of denial, both seeing, neither naming the change. Then one Tuesday the hospital called. "Ms. Rowan, it's Claire from Mr. Whitman's office." He collapsed at a meeting. He's at St. Mercy Hospital. The drive was a smear of red lights and the sound of my pulse in my teeth. In his hospital bed he looked small beneath linens. He smiled crookly when he saw me and made a joke about complimentary overnight stays. When the machines hummed around us, he reached for my hand. "I always thought your father would teach you to stand tall," he said. "But I'm glad it turned out to be me." He took my hand and with a voice thinner than I'd ever heard, said, "You've exceeded every expectation anyone ever had for you. Remember, you're not the extra piece." His laugh came, but softer. He left the hospital and came home more fragile. We didn't dwell on the scare. He gave me that Christmas an updated journal, the one he'd given me at 13, now a log filled with notes, jokes, scribbles, and taped receipts with remarks like "Best Burger of 2014. The last page carried a message in shaky handwriting. "If they ever try to erase you again, remember this, you've already written your own chapter." I asked if he'd written in it all these years. He shrugged and said, "Couldn't let you keep all the good lines." I hugged him like someone clinging to a lighthouse. Months later, before dawn, the phone buzzed and the hospital's voice came through steady and then thin. "Miss Rowan, I'm so sorry. Arthur passed away in his sleep this morning." Sound deserted me as if life had turned its volume down. The following days were a fog. Calls, documents, funeral arrangements. He had named me executor, of course he had. Who else would know what mattered? Which tie was a serious one? Which songs made him grimace? How he despised lies and preferred plain white roses. The funeral was small, elegant, the way he would have wanted. I stood beside his photo through condolences that felt muffled like underwater echoes. Then they arrived, my parents, Jenna, Lila, stepping into the chapel as if onto red carpet. My mother hid behind enormous sunglasses. My father smiled somberly and offered practice speeches about loss and family, despite not having spoken to Arthur in decades. When they reached for me, their faces cycled through shock, guilt, and calculation. "You never mentioned he was close to you?" my mother feigned. "We had no idea," she mouthed, clutching my hand with an accusing softness. I let go gently. "You never asked," I said. The word family hung in the air between us, and their faces hardened into opportunism. Do you know when the will be read? Jana piped, already angling. Wheela fluttered a pearl earring like rehearsal for sorrow. I felt like I had walked into a play where everyone knew their lines. Within a week, the flood began. Text, insincere voicemails, social media requests. We should reconnect. My mother's messages began thick with honey. We are family. Jasmine, I corrected my thought. Jana's message slid into my DMs. We should talk about estate matters. Lily sent a sad emoji. Arthur's attorney called to set the will reading, warning it might be eventful. He had been specific, he said. The will reading took place in a room smelling of leather and old money. My mother dabbed in invisible tears with designer tissues. My father folded his hands into a posture of authority. Jana's phone glittered beneath the table like a second presence. Lila folded her hands as if praying. Mr. Green read with measured cadence, debts and donations, and then the remaining estate. I could feel the atmosphere bend as he continued. He read with care and then came to the line addressing my relatives who remembered me only when the numbers favored them. I leave nothing. The room gasped. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. Jana's jaw dropped. Wheela blinked blankly. Then Mr. Green turned another page, eyes on me. To my niece, Mira Rowan, abandoned at 13 but never absent since. I leave the entirety of my estate, all properties, accounts, holdings. For a suspended beat, no one breathed. Then the room erupted. Accusations, disbelief, corrosive whispers. My father accused me of manipulation. You poisoned him against his family, he spat. I rested my palm on my journal and said softly, You did that yourselves the day you left a note on the fridge. Lila sobbed practiced outrage and said, You can't possibly keep everything. I smiled, a small, tired thing. 15 years of absence doesn't shape a family, I said. It shapes a pattern. Mr. Green closed the folder with finality. The will was airtight. Any contest would be dismissed. My mother flapped like a wounded bird but had nothing to offer. Anger curdled into a bitter sense of entitlement on their faces. I smoothed my dress and stood. If you'll excuse me, I said. I have things to take care of. Jana hissed. This isn't over. I looked at her evenly. It was over when you stopped calling me your sister. Then I left the room. Outside, air was sharper, more honest, as if a long-held breath was released. I pulled out my phone and typed a message to no one. Wish you could see their faces right now, old man. Then I tapped another line to myself. You were right. I wrote my own chapter. I stood on the balcony of Arthur's house, my house now, and watched the city lights flicker like a slow heartbeat. The journal felt heavy and warm in my hands. I turned to the last page and read a sentence again, as if it were an instruction. I whispered, I did. I'll keep writing. Grief came in waves, quiet ones and jagged ones. I managed affairs, signed paperwork, dealt with contractors, and learned to trust the pens he gave me. The house filled with strangers making respectful noises. Then came the calls from my mother, oily apologies followed by wilder requests. Could I loan money? Could I host a farewell? My siblings tried to fix themselves into this new picture. But I had learned to see them clearly. Their concern was porous. Their love conditional dot as executor, I navigated the practicalities with a steady hand, property valuations, bank accounts, staff who had been with him for years. I discovered small, intimate truths about him and his receipts and notes, his taste for terrible television, his devotion to an old battered fountain pen, the list of things that made him laugh. I found a letter addressed to me hidden among his books. In it, he wrote not about wealth, but about small things, that my posture mattered more than fashion, that my voice would carry if I let it, that home is a verb, not a place. When the last forms were signed, I sat on the parquet floor in the study and opened the journal he had filled across 15 years. Pages were dense with advice, quick sketches, film recommendations, and marginalia about life's oddities. On one page he had written, "Stand up straight. Your spine is your argument." On another, a list titled "Things Mira Must See" with little phrases and locations. Between the lines I found evidence of a life that had been, for him, better shared. People asked what I planned to do. Keep it, I told them. The house would be a home, not a showpiece. Arthur had structured his affairs not to punish his family, but to protect the life he had helped build in me. I learned the hard arithmetic of freedom, how to convert grief into obligation, obligation into action, and action into something that could hold a life. I leaned on my friends and on Noah, who planted a tree in the back garden in Arthur's memory. Watching it grow taller as if it too understood legacy. There were moments of cruelty. My mother attempted to get into the house one afternoon, dressed in a neat black coat as if mourning had become a fashion. She looked at the rooms with a speculative eye and asked about the paintings as if she had always known them. "You sure this is for the best?" she asked in that voice that had coaxed me into staying invisible. I offered tea and listened to a litany of excuses I had heard before. Then I walked her to the gate and held the door open for a long beat. When he stopped opening my door at 13, I said, "I stopped waiting for you to come through it." She flinched as if I'd thrown a stone. She left without asking to be let back in. Over time I made changes that were small and meaningful. I kept Arthur's study mostly the same because some places have a gravity that shouldn't be altered. I turned the guest room into a workshop where I drew plans and learned software that let me design bridges. I used the funds he left to seed a scholarship for students who had obstacles no one else recognized. A program with a simple rule: if you were abandoned, or lost a caregiver, or needed someone to bet on you, apply. The scholarship wasn't about money alone. It was about being seen. I hired the house staff Arthur had loved and insisted that their loyalties be to the warmth he cherished, not to ostentation. Legal battles did arise. My family tried lawsuits, accusations of undue influence, claims that I had manipulated Arthur in his last years. Each motion was a storm to weather. I attended depositions and hearings, and each time, I sat in the sterile rooms and recounted quiet realities, how he had taken me in, how he had been steady and clear about his intentions, how we had both loved and labored within the margins of a life that had taught us to fight without spectacle. When the court affirmed the will, I felt the relief as a low, solid thing, like an anchor settling into riverbed. The months became years. I married small victories to small adjustments. Noah and I bought a modest row house near the water and kept visiting the garden where we first met. On weekends, we'd walk the city streets Arthur used to stroll, and I'd tell Noah stories from the journal, the sketches, the lists, the jokes he had scored into the margins. I taught engineering with the humility he had modeled. Listen first, then build. One of my first projects as a young engineer was a pedestrian bridge over the river, practical and quiet, an elegant solution that fit into its environment like a secret. I stood on it years later and thought of Arthur telling me half of success is tone and handshake. The bridge was a thing that lasted. People changed their opinions of me like seasons. Some who had once looked away returned with bows and soft smiles, but I found myself less interested in forgiveness than in containing a life that belonged to me. My relationship with my mother became a study in boundaries. We communicated on terms we set. Sometimes she would call and I would answer, sometimes not. In the beginning she asked for money. Later she asked for a seat at our table. Eventually she settled into the margins I allowed her. Jana made a few attempts to step back into my life using our shared past as an entryway. I listened and sometimes we spoke. Leela unfollowed and then followed back. The patterns of old habit die slow, and some die only because you decide to stop feeding them. I kept the journal on a low shelf in our bedroom. Its leather softened by years. Often I'd open it to find his voice like a lamp. If I was indecisive about a contract, I would read his note about standing firm. If I felt small in a negotiation, I'd flip to a sketch of a handshake and remember the difference between tone and truth. The house that used to be only his became an archive of mentoring, tax receipts annotated with jokes, small maps to restaurants he thought underrated, lists of names with notes that would make anyone smile. I used the estate not as a fortress but as a platform. I sponsored a small community program to teach kids how to design and build things with materials they found, trash into bridges, scraps into stools. Arthur would have liked that. There were nights when grief returned with a surprising weight. I would sit in the study and leaf through pages, and a sentence would catch me. "You never were the extra piece," he'd written once. I would let the line settle like a benediction and then get up and make coffee. Life kept asking for small commitments, a meeting, a site visit, a call. My days filled with work and people and the kind of ordinary responsibilities that keep a life upright. Years after his death, On the anniversary of the day, he had come to the porch and told me to get into his car. I visited the library where I had once borrowed books like armor. I sat in the same seat and read about cities and bridges and histories people get wrong. I thought about how strange and sharp the world is, how a note on a fridge could cleave a life apart, and how someone's deliberate choice to keep you could stitch the pieces back together into something better than whole. I thought about how wealth can be a scent some people wear like a mask, and for others it is simply a tool. Arthur had used his tools to teach me to wield mine. I never became the version of a person my parents expected. I became someone who kept a journal, who built things, who opened a door and let people keep rooms rather than perform for them. The house wasn't decoration anymore. It was the repository of a life shared and taught. My uncle's legacy turned into a ledger of small mercies, the dentist appointment at 14, the desk that kept me from studying on the floor, the lesson that people matter when you choose them. When my niece was 13 years old, a spark of a girl with a backpack on the porch, I found myself driving a glossy sedan to her curb, rolling the window down and saying, "Get in." I had learned how to keep someone before they learned to stand. I did not offer grand speeches. I offered a plate of warm pasta and a place to sleep. I offered a line of inheritance that meant something different, not money as bargaining chip, but resources as a foundation. I gave her a small leather journal and told her to write down the things she'd notice. Mostly, I told her to keep living. When someone asks me now what I learned from that life, my answer is not neat. I learned that generosity can be fierce. I learned that family is not only blood. Sometimes it's the person who opens a fridge and invites you in. I learned to build not just structures but steadiness. Arthur's last line in his journal said, "If they ever try to erase you again, remember this, you've already written your own chapter." I kept writing mine. Sometimes with trepidation, sometimes with joy, but always on my own terms, sitting on the balcony with Noah, watching the city's lights flip and glow. I often feel like a book in the middle of its pages, unfinished, ongoing, with margins still to fill. On the nights when I close the door and look at the journal beneath a lamp, I know how lucky I am that someone decided with deliberate kindness to keep me. I know how important it is to keep others in turn, not as charity, not as spectacle, but as an act of quiet, stubborn love that says, "You belong here."